Oh, hello everyone, and welcome to Graetzy's Nerd Cave. You can think of this as a safe space for people who are struggling with their addiction and just can't stop buying camera gear. Or if you're like many in this time of economic difficulty where we don't have necessarily the spare cash flow to support our habit, and you want to live vicariously through some nerdy wanker who's got more toys than he knows what to do with, allow me to be that wanker. And thirdly, if you might be just a person starting out in the industry and you're looking for ways to get your content to stand apart from all the other Insta-turkeys and YouTubers out there, this can also be the place for you. So I'm really hoping to be able to provide that kind of a growth and community learning opportunity for all of us. And the plan is to do these episodes live every time. So that means that it's not just going to be a talking head, which most live videos end up having to be for various practical reasons. It can also be something, let's see if this works, something that has multiple angles. Like this beautiful red Monstro here. I just realized I forgot to turn on my flare light in all the rush of getting ready, but we can sort that out later. Maybe you're using something like a Canon 6D on a nice little moving platform here, which can be another camera angle. These are all ways that you can mix up a live streaming environment and ways that we can make things a little bit more engaging, and that's something that we can go through in a lot of detail. But I thought maybe to begin with, let's just jump back to the main camera here. What I could do is take you through, I guess, first who I am. There are a lot of turkeys out there. There's every chance that I'm one of them, but at least that way you've got a chance to hear the kind of things that I've done in the past, very, very briefly, and then you can work out whether that's going to have some value of information for you in the future. So what I'm going to do is just go, I'm not really a massive fan of talking about myself, so I'm going to go through this in a very, very fast-paced manner. If I talk too fast, and I probably will for the whole episode, hopefully you can use the magic technology of rewind and DVR to catch up on things that you missed. So just to give you the really, really quick rundown on my background, probably about 18 years ago, I started I was actually studying law and business at university. It was my third attempt at getting through a university course, which I failed later. And I started doing graphic and web design, sort of taught myself to pay for my uni fees, and that kind of took off. And pretty soon I was earning enough money where staying at university, again, seemed futile. We could talk about my views on tertiary education at another time, I'm sure. So from there, I took out a loan for $8,000, purchased a Canopus EOS edit suite based on the Windows 2000 state-of-the-art platform, and also purchased, let me just see if I can reach this here, just a beautiful piece of history. This gorgeous Super VHS deck, look at that, it still works. This was the core of my business at the time, so that proves to you just how old I am, but hopefully not completely out of touch. And from there, the video editing business really grew, and one thing led to another. It was repeat and referral business. I made quite a bit of money from some of the biggest companies in Australia at the time before the global financial crisis, doing editing and animation. My first, I guess the start of my gear addiction, which is pretty chronic, as you can probably see behind me here, was the magic Sony PD150, which was capable of recording standard definition widescreen. And I'd take the footage, chuck it in the computer, and I'd de-interlace it using the old Magic Bullet plugin. People thought that was pretty cool at the time. And really started off a career as just doubling down on life as a DIY filmmaker. There it is, the picture there, you'll actually see me standing on my own homemade dolly, which used skateboard wheels that slid on silicon pads so that you could go around corners. And that meant that you could use irrigation pipe to set yourself up a big curved dolly. That's my first music video there I'm shooting. I think I actually once turned up to the airport for a shoot in Adelaide with 2 rolls of 10-meter irrigation pipe looped over my shoulder, gaff taped up, and actually asked the lady to check that in for the flight, and she did, and the shoot in Adelaide went really well. So that's the kind of DIY aesthetic I guess I bring to a lot of things even today. Moving on from there, I again sort of moved through editing animation, doing a lot of Final Cut at the time, Final Cut Pro, learned After Effects in pretty great detail, and that's been something that's really supported my business quite substantially. And then heard about a camera company called Red that was about to release this piece of vaporware no one had really heard about. They were talking about a camera for $17,500 that could shoot 4K RAW. Nothing else on the market could do anything like that at the time. So I went to the NAB show in Las Vegas and put down $1,000 deposit in 2007. All I got to show for it was this I'll just jump in here. We'll punch in, have a look at that. Whoop, wait, get rid of that one. That beautiful piece of metal there was all I had to show for it. It's got the serial number of my first Red camera etched on the bottom, which is 329. And it took another year and a half for that token to turn into an actual camera. And I'm sure you'll be pleased to see that's me there spooning the box when it arrived, which, as I'm sure you'll agree, as fellow gear addicts, that's an extremely reasonable reaction to have when something arrives from FedEx. That really took off a huge new avenue of my business. We tried to experiment as much as we possibly could. Here's a classic shot with the great Jonas McQuiggan there, creating what at the time we thought was the first VR 360 camera. So we actually shot straight up in the air into a glass dome and then unwrapped that footage in post. And pretty soon I was renting that camera out to just about every production company around because it was sort of bleeding edge tech. It saved them a lot of money on film processing. And we sort of set ourselves up as a bit of a rental house for very specific purposes. That's my, that side. That's my legendary brother, Johnny Graetz, who was working with me at the time. And yeah, I think at the time we kind of really didn't know what we were doing. Didn't know what to charge, didn't know what the film industry was, pissed a lot of people off. Apparently we overnight destroyed the role of the second AC, so I humbly apologise to all second ACs out there who may have been affected. Hopefully you're back on your feet by now. And that really took off. People were using it both as data wranglers, colorists, editors, unset kind of DIT roles before there were DITs, and obviously renting the cameras out all around the place. It even took me to be involved with an ill-fated kung fu movie that shot in Hong Kong, Australia, and Miami. I rented the cameras to that production. I was also the editor and the colorist, so you can see some little samples there of the side-by-side color grading. Some great stories from that one, which are probably for another episode, including the time that I almost got into a fist fight with the director, who was a real asshole. And the fight was broken up by the lead actor, who was actually a legit Shaolin monk warrior. So Red cameras can really take you to some very interesting places, as you can see. From there, I took over the famous Zoom studios from the legendary Mark Toyer, who's a TVC director from Brisbane who shoots all over the world. He left the studios and I took over a 10-year lease there and started to set that place up as a real production hub. So we had post, grading, camera rentals obviously, and these huge studios that we could rent out to various productions as well as doing our own things. So that was really taking us down that path of kind of being a service-based company. Of course, Mother Nature had some other plans. Before I go into that, just mention that was the beginning of my love affair with motion control. There you can see the cam block modular motion control, which was just a huge boost in the production value of everything we did. But Mother Nature did have other plans, and that studio unfortunately went underwater in the 2011 floods, which forced a bit of a tree change actually for me. I bought a little bit of property out in the suburbs and set up the studio that I'm shooting in here today. And from there, got into making music videos, all kinds of experimental films, lucky enough to win some awards, been nominated for Best Music Video at the ARIAs a couple of times, won the National Golden Tripod for a skateboarding thing I can show you at another point. And that brings us pretty much to today. I've also kind of set myself up doing a bit of political satire as really a form of catharsis. Otherwise, I just boil with rage at the apathy and incompetence of our political leaders. So that gives me a chance to stick it to them a little bit, and for the 3 people who watch it really get a kick out of it. So if you do feel like checking that one out, you'll see that on the bottom of the screen, the Undercurrent TV. That's something that we're really starting to get back up again. So I guess thankfully I don't have to talk about myself anymore. We can go into, I suppose, where we could go from here and the kind of episodes that we might want to make. And as I said, this is really designed to be very interactive, so I should have a way of seeing some comments coming through live here, but if I don't, I might do it the old-fashioned way and just read them off the webpage. So please, if you've got a question, shoot that through and I'll try to get to them as we go. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, and supposedly Instagram. I kind of figured that out last night, but that was a little bit sketchy, so can't guarantee that one's working. If you are on Instagram and you're watching in that tiny little vertical window, feel free to jump on over to one of the other platforms and join us in all of its high definition glory. Let me just see, I've got a question here from Stephen Pam. How did you have the confidence to know how much to charge for those early music videos, and how much do you charge? Or do you consider those as more creative projects and make money on corporate work? Yes, Stephen, they are creative projects. Music videos, I'm sad to say, really aren't, unless you're working, I suppose, in the US with really major labels and you're doing Britney Spears clips, wow, that's a dated reference, Taylor Swift clips, you're not really going to find a lot of projects that have a profit margin left over by the time you paid for the gear and paid for all of the crew. So for me, music videos are very much an outlet for creativity, to experiment with new tricks that I might have been trying. And really, these days, only doing them with bands that I kind of have a bit of a personal connection with, like the Violent Soho guys. Obviously, I've done a ton for them. We get on really well, and they're a brilliant band to work for. So yeah, that's kind of my ethos with music videos. Sorry if I'm the bearer of bad news to anyone on the small chance of actually making a full-time career out of music videos, but they are a really great way to test yourself and to work with lots of interesting teams. That's something we can talk about in a second. So just let me check here quickly. Sorry that I don't have these live comments going through. It really seemed like that was going to be a thing. One thing I did want to just touch on was maybe going into some of the topics that we could talk about in future episodes, and hit me up in the comments while this live episode's running, and certainly if you're watching this in the future, drop it into the comments there and I'll be sure to go and check them. And if there's something that stands out to you, that's something we can focus on in the future. So one of the first things that I guess we could do future episodes on is the idea of live streaming and home broadcasting, or DIY broadcasting. Anyone who might have recently seen, I did a webinar with the Creative Solutions guys. That's Teradek and Small HD and Wooden Camera and a few other companies involved there. And in that one, I was really showing people that's really why I've got this ridiculous nerdy setup, was to do that. And then I thought, why not make an episode for my own channel at the same time? So just to quickly take you through some of the things you can do. So for instance, when most people think of live broadcasting, they just try to get a camera on the web and they just talk to it. And it's a talking head situation. It can be a bit nerve-wracking to try and work in other content in that live environment. But by getting my cameras, which are ostensibly filmmaking cameras, they're not streaming cameras, by finding ways to get them into the iMac Pro there, using a whole heap of this nerdy crap that we can talk about, I'm able to layer them up, trigger them all using this iPad here. I can do some cool things, like for instance, if I pull up this little application here, called NDI HX Camera, I can actually wirelessly, any second now, throw my phone into the live stream. So you can see there in front of me, I've got a custom remote surface that's got all of my cues on it. So these are all things that I've prepared in advance so that I don't have to sort of fumble around and look for files. They're sort of ready to go. The ones in blue are actually macros. So not only do they play a piece of content, they also move the camera shot to another position. So if I just switch back to the main camera there. So just to take you through, I won't labor this too much because I went through it on that webinar, but I'll just quickly take you through the inputs that we're working with here today. We've got a C500mkII back there. That's got an Angenieux EZ 15 to 40 zoom on it, and I've got the nucleus somewhere, there it is, got the nucleus hand controller there running into it, so you can have a little bit of lens control as you go. So you can see there, it's a par focal lens, so if I wanted to I could zoom all the way in to kind of check my focus, and there's my ruddy nervous complexion there coming back out, kind of framing up. So that's a Canon C500mkII I'm using for the main camera. The benefit of this is that it's actually running 4K SDI at the back of it into a Blackmagic device that talks to the iMac Pro. That gives me the ability to punch in without losing resolution. So that's another angle made out of that C500. I can punch into the other side as well. Gives you a bit of spare space to put some graphics up on the side. So having that 4K input to play with in a 1080p stream is obviously really handy. I've also got the Monstro here. And while I'm at it, just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to turn a gratuitous flare light on. Just a little detail I've got set up here. There we go. You can't have an anamorphic light without a flare. It's just not right. So yes, this is my trusty Monstro 8K. This is what I shoot most of my music videos on. Later we'll talk about camera rigs and I can take you through the bits and pieces of that rig. Anything that you're interested in there, just hit me up in the comments. And then we've got over the other side here, we've got a Canon 6D Mark II. That's running on a Red Rock Micro one-man crew director, which just sort of bounces back and forward autonomously. Now, interestingly, that's running just with a USB cable and the new Canon EOS Webcam Utility straight into the iMac Pro, and the software I'm using, which is called Mimo Live, can pick that camera up as a full screen, clean feed device that you can switch to. You can see there is a little bit of lag, like slightly choppy frame rate. I'd imagine that whatever it's having to do out of that tiny little body to get a clean feed out makes up for that. So that's got autofocus, it's got a little 16 to 35 L series lens on there. And then we've also got the iPhone you saw before. We've got the webcam on the iMac Pro, just as a little bit of a behind the scenes angle, I guess, that's a bit of fun. I can also switch to the output of my laptop here, and we can play with a little bit of editing stuff later on, show you tease a couple of techniques for music videos that I think some of you might be interested in. So that's live streaming. On that front, actually, one other thing that's really key to mention is the field of NDI. So you would have known SDI and HDMI, they're signal formats most people would be familiar with. NDI, sorry about that, very unprofessional of me. NDI, which I wish I could remember what it stood for. I think it's something like Network Device Interface or something. Basically means that any device that's on a common network, so connected by an Ethernet cable or on a Wi-Fi network, any device that is video capable is able to broadcast itself out to other things on that network, and they're able to suck that video stream down and display it full screen or mix it into a live stream or a live mix or something like that without having to run additional cables. It's extremely powerful. It's something that I'm getting into just recently, but a lot more, and we can learn that together in future episodes. While I'm chatting about that, I'm just going to bring up something really quickly to show you. One of the brilliant camera solutions that a lot of streamers are starting to use are PTZ cameras. So that stands for pan, tilt, zoom. So a little robotic head that allows you to zoom and pan pan, tilt, and zoom the camera. And a lot of the really good ones have this NDI capability built into them. So I'll just quickly flick across here to, you can see there, this is a pretty amazing company I've just come across called Bird Dog. The reason why I like them is because they're Australian. I'm just going to jump into there. I'll show you the new, this is very exciting. So they've it's almost on the market. They've released this bad boy, which is a pan tilt zoom camera with 4K 10-bit resolution over NDI. It's got a 12 by optical zoom. It's still got SDIs and HDMI on it, so you can still run it with legacy equipment, but it has that NDI capability, which you can also power the camera with. So with one cable, you could run multiples of these out, and with one cable, you can power the camera, you get the feed from the camera, and you can control the movement of the camera all with one Ethernet cable. So you'd run that into a power over Ethernet switch, and then you'd have a pretty dynamic multicam environment with very little infrastructure needed. You could set it up quickly. They're small units. So that's something I'm really getting into that we can talk about further. So I think that covers the live streaming. I might move on to music videos and some of the topics we could drill into in more detail there. So I've made a substantial number of music videos. Let me just, while I'm talking you through it, I'll pull up an example. So one of the ones I'm probably best known for is a clip for Violent Soho called Covered in Chrome. That was lucky enough to get a nomination for Best Music Video at the ARIAs. The trick with that one was it was a single shot clip, but it had mixed frame rates without any cuts. So we were able to use slow motion in the verses, and then I think we were shooting 35 frames a second in the verses, and then 20 frames a second in the choruses, and had a smooth transition between those frame rates, so that you had this kind of frenetic energy in the chorus that was stacked up against the more sort of slow and dreamy vibe. And that's all shot on a Steadicam. I think at the time it was an Epic M that I was shooting that on with a Takina 11-16. So you can see here the transition about to happen to the faster frame rate. One of the things that I feel like with music videos tricks people up a little bit or makes them reticent to try interesting techniques is sync. So obviously the challenge of a music video is you need the artist to be performing in sync. So one of the techniques that I've used for a long time is to create my own synchronized timecode sync video files that I can then play on an iPad, hold up in front of the camera, and you get yourself in perfect sync. So if I'll just show you a bit of this. Sorry, just clear that. So this is a recent one. You'll see there the guy holding up the iPad at the start of the shot there. So this is a recent one for Violent Soho called Pick It Up Again. That's me with the Monstro rig. I can talk you through later. What this timecode gives you the ability to do is to film at any frame, pretty much any frame rate that the camera is capable of, as long as you prepare the files properly in advance. And then with a couple of clicks, every take that you've shot on the day can drop onto your timeline and be in sync straight away without having to eye match. You don't have to go along and find a cymbal hit or some kind of a impact moment that gives you your sync point. You're doing it all just with the numbers, and it just saves so much heartache, makes you more creative, speeds things up. I'll show you a little example. So if I just jump across here to VLC, so you can see there, that's the kind of file. Let's drop the volume down a little bit. So that's the kind of file we create. It shows you the name of the song, the frame rate that you're shooting at, and then it gives you a time code. If I just jump across to the MacBook Pro here, so you can see here, this is my timeline. I'll just turn that sound scrub off, that doesn't annoy you. This is probably at a draft stage when I was editing. This is the performance section of the clip that I was cutting up. I think I was cutting this on a plane at the time. And you can see at the bottom there is a timecode track that we used on the day of the actual shoot. So I'll quickly show you an example of how easy it is when you've got this kind of capability. So if I go up here, here's this is just a wild take straight out of the camera. If I just find the moment where the time code was held up, I can kind of jog backwards and forwards. Okay, so 1:51:15, and now we just go down and find that moment on the timeline. 1:51:15. Hit the Q button, and then we should. There might be a bit of lag coming through to the stream, but you can see there he's singing in sync, and we just synced up an off-speed take very quickly. So that was actually filmed at 22 frames a second there, I think, 90-degree shutter. So normally that'd be a pretty tricky thing to try and sync up, but that system makes it really easy to do. One of the clips that really came in handy for is one I did for East. I'll just drop that up. She's a really great Australian artist. The concept behind this one was doing 10 individual one takes in the same location, but changing the frame rate each time so that the talent would end up running a little bit further on each take down this alleyway. And in every take, we made the world around her more and more dystopian. So we started ripping things off the walls and throwing rubbish everywhere, and people started getting more rowdy in the background. So you can see there the number of frame rates that we were using throughout it. So there's 10 takes going from 50 frames a second all the way to, I think it was 24 frames a second was the finishing take. And using that iPad system was the only way of achieving this kind of a dynamic. And I think it's a really effective way of kind of heightening the action. And I mean, I just love single shot clips to begin with because I've got a really short attention span. I don't really like watching music videos, which is probably something I shouldn't admit. What I really don't like watching are music videos with these really long narrative sections. If you want to watch some dickhead walk through waist-high wheat in magic hour, go watch the Hallmark Channel. I'm not really into that for music videos. If I want to watch a clip, I want to see a band performing, and I want to see them performing in a really unique and interesting way. And that's why I think getting that lip sync nailed is a really crucial technique to kind of take some of the pressure off and leave more of your brain power left over for creativity and decisions when it comes to the editing. So I think that's probably enough about music videos. I'm just going to quickly check how we're doing on the comments here. Thanks, Stephen. This is just more of a test for me as well to see how this little comment section works. So if I, 1 second, guys. So in theory, there you go. Thanks, Stephen, for saying that was an awesome trick with the iPad. You've just given me a reason to test this system in Mimo Live that I haven't used before, where you can live pull in comments from your social media feeds and then be able to bring them up even with the avatar of the person, and that's all a fairly automated process. I was hoping to be able to do it on the iPad here, which is sidecard to the iMac Pro, but the touch function's not working there, which is my fault. Clearly there's a gap in my knowledge there. I apologize. But anyway, I'll clear that one off. So moving on, I thought the next thing we could talk about briefly is camera rigs. Before we do that, just let me double check that see if there's any other comments that people want to throw in the mix. So what I'll do is switch over to the phone here again. So this is using that NDI protocol I told you about before. So there's a special app that you can get from a company called NewTek. It's called NDI space HX space camera. And that gives you the ability to send your iPhone. If your phone's on the same network as the device that's receiving the NDI, then you can wirelessly have your phone as a part of your vision mix. So if we cross over to the phone here, that'll come up in a sec. Actually, why don't we do a split screen? We can do that. There it is. So if I just head across here and just show you a few little things on the Monstro rig here. So you can see there we're rolling with a Atlas Orion that's a 40mm, which is pretty much my favorite lens in the whole world right now. One cool thing that I've been able to do with this Monstro rig is, just one sec, I might actually, okay, cool, I'm on the, you guys can hear me okay there on the lapel? Yeah, it looks like that's coming through. So famously, Red cameras lack internal ND. It's one of my bugbears. It's something I've tried to talk to them about, and I'm sure many other people have as well. Hopefully they're going to implement it in their DSM-C3 range, but they've never had internal ND, which is a real pain. This is the revolver mount from Kipitai. I've got an EF version here, and that actually gives you the ability, if I just undo this guy, to install your own cartridges of ND. Sorry, that's just stuck a little bit there. So you can see there I can flick through and choose the different levels of ND. So this cartridge that I've got in here has a 0.3, it's got a 0.6, 0.9, and then back to clear. You can also get diffusion for these, so you can get various levels of diffusion. Sorry, I can't get that off right now. If I just spin around again, and I'm using parts of my cam block motion control rig here, just bear with me for a sec, I'm just gonna mute some of these. So that you can see there, that's the new Kipitai long take 2TB mag. There's also a DSMC2 Teradek wireless module here built in. So basically that's what's feeding the Monstro feed to you guys. And that means that with no cables, I'm able to have wireless HD straight out of the camera. If you cruise around the other side here, I've got a RT motion focus system built in. So that's the antenna for it there. Unfortunately, you do need to run a few external cables to make that one work. But what it does is it gives me the ability to have this finger wheel control here, which when you're dealing with an anamorphic lens that has a massive focus throw, being able to just flick your fingers and go from infinity to minimums is a pretty handy thing, especially when you're in a frenetic music video environment. So coming back around, we can see the shot lined up there. We'll just pull focus. So camera rigs, I suppose, are, jump back to the camera there. Rigging up cameras in weird ways is something I'm a massive fan of. So I've got a lot of, switch back to the overhead mic. I've got a lot of wooden camera accessories and all kinds of camera brackets and accessories that I've collected and built up over the years. So you can pretty much rig a camera in any situation you want. So that's something we can talk about in future. We can come up with some interesting little rigs for various purposes. Another thing we could chat about is time lapse. So if I just bring up, time lapse is something I've done for a long time. The way I got started with it was a little bit of background. Our family weren't the most wealthy in the world. We were pretty just, fairly average suburban Queensland family. Never really had holidays other than in rat-infested apartments on the Gold Coast for 3 or 4 days at a time. When we grew up a little bit and we all started to make some of our own money, we decided to save up and have the ultimate European holiday. So we went over there for 9 weeks. It was the trip of the lifetime. And on the way over there, I bought my first DSLR, which was a Nikon D70. I bought it in Hong Kong, which was a stop on the way over on the trip, and managed to pick up a little wireless trigger that could let you trigger one frame at a time. I knew nothing about intervalometers at the time, intervalometers, sorry. So what I would do is go out into these epic locations, set up the camera, and I would stand there with the wireless remote and go click, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, click. And I was my own intervalometer, which was a pretty painful way of doing it, but got some pretty cool footage. Then sort of graduated from that to doing motion control time lapse, like you can see there. That's where you've got the camera on a kind of a digital slider rig, which lets you set keyframes for movement. I've got something pretty cool I can show you over there in a second on that front. But yeah, I think time-lapse is an extremely effective storytelling medium for a lot of purposes, for corporate videos, for documentaries, for a wide range of end purposes. And there's a lot of little techniques that you can slip you up if you don't know about them. There's some gear that I've got here that I've been meaning to try out for a while, which can actually get me a flicker-free, seamless day to night sunset time lapse, which is sort of the holy grail of time lapsing. So we could learn that one together. On the motion control front, why don't we just go and have a, because I like to be as practical as possible. I don't really like to just be talking about theory. So if I clear that, we jump across to the phone again. I'm going to take you over and show you. So the cam block motion control is something that really up the production values on what I do dramatically. The one I've got over here that's sitting, there's a couple of modules of it that camera's being controlled by. So let me jump to the phone here. And you can see the controller there. This is the one I used in a clip called Saramona Said, where I was sitting in the boot of a station wagon under a pile of dirty clothes, controlling the camera for a single shot clip. So you've got a live joystick control, and you can also build your own keyframes on this little timeline here and do some pretty elaborate stuff. So what motion control gives you the ability to do is create elaborate moves that you can run at real time, but you can also scale them and run them extremely slowly over the course of several hours to do a time lapse. You can run it so slowly that you can barely even see the system moving. And the cam block system is just so this is the cam block modular. They've also got the cam block adventure, which we'll go over and have a look at now. And I'll just show you something that I think is pretty cool there. Just one second. So if we come over in my extremely messy, wait a second. Turn on the lapel mic. You should be able to hear me now. So this is the cam block adventure, and I've just set up a couple of basic moves on it to show you something that I think is pretty revolutionary. So you can see there, it's a pan tilt head. I've got a 5D Mark II on there at the moment, just for the purposes of this little test. And you can basically put this thing on boxes. I've got it on a couple of tripods here. You can put it on various angles. It's extremely powerful. I've run red cameras on this. I've run ARRIs on it. There's a wide range of solutions for it. So I'm just going to quickly connect. You can see here I've got a little wireless tablet. It's going to connect to the network of that. So we jump into the cam block app. Any second now. Sorry guys, this is the beauty of doing things live. Basically, the function that I'm wanting to show you is the ability to shoot several time-lapse movies at the same time, all with motion control, and not having to repeat multiple moves if you're in a situation, for instance, where you are, say, trying to film a sunset. You know you're only going to get one crack at it. You don't have to be limited to one motion control move. You can actually set up multiples and then shoot them at the same time. It seems like we're having a little bit of an issue here. Sorry guys, this makes for boring TV, doesn't it? Almost there. Here we go. So what I've got pre-saved in here are a series of moves. So let's have a look. You can see there, this is move 1. And then move 2 looks like this. While the camera's down here, I'll take the lens cap off and we'll flick the camera on. And then move 3 looks like this. So you can see there, that's what the timelines look like when you create a couple of keyframes. So we'll run that move backwards. Nope. And that's my next move. So you can see there each time the camera's pointing in a different direction, capturing different, you imagine on one side you might have some traffic, on the other side you might have some people, and it's looking up in the sky and grabbing some clouds, and we want to shoot all of those at the same time. So we jump into multi-move, and you can see there the 3 moves all stacked up, and we're going to choose, this is the function that I think is absolutely revolutionary, interleave time-lapse. So if I load that up, we jump into the settings, you can see we've got our 3 moves selected. There's a huge range of variables we can apply for exposure and what have you, because this system is actually going to take care of taking the photos each time. So if I go over to start here, and watch this. So basically it's taking the first frame of each of those 3 moves, and then it's going to move to the next position on the track. You'll barely see it move for this because of how long the real-time application of it is. And then basically in software, there's a piece of software that splits those 3 files apart into 3 separate time lapses, but you film them all in the same pass at the same time of day, and you're getting 3 moves for the price of 1 basically. And you can do more than 3. You could do as many as is practical in the situation. I don't think there's actually a hard limit on it. So I'll just stop that now. So that's just one of the features of the cam block motion control rig that I think is absolutely brilliant. Sorry about the shaky phone camera there. Jumping back to the main. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that wasn't too wobbly for you. So again, that's something that we could really get into in more detail, is techniques with that. That same motion control rig, let me see if I've got it here. So I did a shoot for Jared James, where we had 2 of those cam block systems in a very, very tight studio, and we were able to execute. The goal that Jared had for that was he wanted it to be as live as possible. So he really wanted to perform and use the same audio and the same vision from the one take that he was happy with, which is a real challenge, especially for a filmmaker, because you want as many takes as you can get to edit it together. So we had 4 cameras in there. We had 2 on tripods and 2 on robots, and it gave us the ability to achieve something really high end. So if you see there, that's Ben operating the system that I just showed you in this really intelligent mode where you can set up cue cards. So you can pick, I think it's up to 9 positions on the track, and you can jump between any variable of those 9 positions at 3 different speeds. And we've used that in live concerts before. We've put that rig down in the mosh pit, like in front of the mosh pit between the crowd barrier and the stage, and been able to execute these amazing moves where you can be looking up at the artist or you can be looking up out at the crowd. So that's just some examples of the power of motion control. I'm a massive fan of it. You can do, what's some of the other stuff I've got in here? There's our little motion control reel. One of the other cool applications of motion control is being able to duplicate the same person in the one shot. So you can run perfectly repeatable passes. So once you set up your move, you can run it as many times as you want, and you can even subtly scale the timings of those moves and then still have them line up in post. So there's a shot, I think it's coming up here from the Ballpark Music Surrender clip. Oh, that's a shot we did, which is probably the longest Hitchcock zoom I've ever seen. We did it on an 18 to 200mm Cook lens down a hallway, and the motion control allowed us to just perfectly keyframe that dolly zoom so that the end points all matched up, probably in a way that would be pretty difficult to do by hand. This is you can see here the multipass I'm talking about at different speeds. So that's Sam Cromack, the lead singer, actually singing in different frame rates next to copies of himself singing at other frame rates. So yeah, there's a lot of creativity you can apply with this kind of a thing, along with a lot of control. That's the band duplicated several times in a church, again, because you can repeat those passes perfectly. The system, the modular cam block system we've got, has the ability, as you can see there, to be mounted vertically. So we had it in a stairwell for a clip, and we had multiple copies of the person walking up the stairs. So yeah, I think motion control is just a technique that people should be across as much as possible. The prices for these bits of equipment are really starting to come down. You can obviously always rent it, and it's something that can add a massive amount of value to your content. quickly skipping over a few other things, and then we might wrap things up soon. The high-speed photography is something that I think it'd be great to talk about. The guy I've got in front of me here is actually the Chronos HD 2.1 1000 frames a second camera. Let me get you a little close-up on that so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see that bad boy there. So you're probably looking at about, I think it was about $5,000 Australian to get that here, to get 1,000 frames a second. So that's pretty powerful, and it's in a form factor that you'd be able to put on gimbals, you'd be able to maybe even put on drones if you want to do something crazy. So there's a lot of, it opens up a lot of possibilities for high-speed photography, whereas before, you know, you're talking about phantoms, which aren't huge, but they're a lot bigger than this. So that's something I'm really keen to get into in more detail, and again, we'd probably be learning together on that one. Another fun little device right there, that's the Laowa 24mm scope lens, which a lot of people would have seen footage of starting to float about online. This thing is cool. I didn't have a heap of time to play with it when I first got it. I got it pretty much straight off the first batch of shipments that they made, but was so busy at the time I didn't really get to play with it. But of course, as I'm sure many of you experience with novel coronavirus, it opens up some free time and some chances to do some things you've been meaning to do for a while, like build a cubby house for your kids, or spend time with your family, or learn an instrument, or play with a scope lens. So of course, I was, as I guess some others may have, let myself go just a little bit during that time, managed to pick up a giant boil on the tip of my nose, and I thought that that just made for the perfect opportunity to shoot a test with this lens, which I'll show you now. Wait for the ending. You'll think it's about the boil, the giant blind pimple, but it's actually not. Let's take a look at that one now. You're welcome. Yeah, very special material there. I'll show you the behind the scenes so you can see the rig that was using the cam block modular system again in underslung mode. So you'll see the camera creeping in here. I actually shot it in reverse because you probably don't want to send a robot with a giant scope on it headed directly into your brain pan. So I lined the shot up, got it in position, pulled focus on that gorgeous nostril hair, and then ran the camera backwards, reversing it in post when I did the edit. And look, you know, it might be under the category of too much information, but I'm sure you're all excited to know that the follicle discoloration on my chin is also evident in other places. Moving on, probably something that's a little less sexy, but I can't even tell you how important it is timecode. Timecode's absolutely changed my workflows and my capabilities in how I operate. And I started off probably with something some of you would have heard of, which are the tentacle sync devices. So they started off with just a little blind pack that you could put on your camera and would feed timecode into devices that didn't even have timecode functionality. So it does that by sending a kind of a blip, 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 blip signal into it that then some software can read as audio, can read the audio of it later on, but it can interpret it as timecode. And it's a way of having multiple devices all synced together so that when you get into editing, there's no wasted pain trying to line all your sources up. So what I have graduated to now are these timecode systems boxes. So this is the, let me just jump in here. This is the UltraSync 1. Or people, I think, refer to them just as USOs. And that'll run for probably, I think I've run one of these for just about 2 days. And you can feed Genlock out of it, you can feed timecode out of it, you can feed audio timecode out of it. So if you're using, say, a DSLR that doesn't have timecode capabilities, you can get a special cable to come off here and go into the microphone in port of the camera, and it'll send that audio signal in that can then later be read as timecode, so you can synchronize things together. I've got one of these that can is made to go on the back of a GoPro. Unfortunately, only a GoPro 7, but it does the job. So I can have GoPro footage perfectly synced up with the rest of my cameras. I've also got this little guy here, which talks to the same system that uses Bluetooth. So this kind of links into our next topic as well, if I reach back here. So this is the audio recorder I'm using on most of my shoots these days, especially when I'm out in the field, and that's the Zoom F6. And that can actually receive Bluetooth timecode from this device. This can also send to iPads, and it has an app where it can come up as an actual visible timecode slate that you could hold up in front of cameras for a confidence check before you start shooting. So basically what happens with these is you choose one of these devices as your master, set the timecode on it, and then every other device using an RF signal wirelessly recognizes that that signal is being sent and locks it together for the rest of your shoot. So as long as these things have battery, everything is perfectly synchronized together. And I cannot tell you how wonderful that is when you get back to the edit suite. It's fantastic. So timecode workflows is something that could be worth getting into more detail on. I can show you some really good tips and tricks with that. The other little topic that I thought some people might be into is I just want to say thanks to Ben Jabanis for recognizing how beautiful that pimple was. Thanks for the comment, Ben. That means a lot to me. Location sound. Now, I shoot a lot on my own, partially because I'm a massive Nigel, partially because it's more practical in certain situations. I've got a lot of high pressure corporate clients who need me at short notice. They need me to go into places that can be hard to get to, so I can't always take a sound recordist with me. So I've had to work out ways to get really good quality sound without needing somebody else along for the ride. Look, if sound is absolutely critical to what you're doing, especially if you're in a drama or a reality TV environment, you're hard pressed to do it without a dedicated sound recordist. And if you find a good one, they're amazing. They're not cheap. And in many situations, I find that if I do have budget or space for a second crew member, often it'll be a sound recordist that's the best option, but sometimes it's going to be a second camera angle that I would prefer to have, in which case knowing how to get your own high quality sound on location is really, really critical. I've worked out a rig with this where I actually have it mounted under my handheld camera, so it faces me and I can see the screen and change it. So I've got the camera on my shoulder and I can actually just reach out and adjust, and then that feeds into the red as a scratch track. But I'm also recording beautiful multi-track 32-bit float sound. So if you haven't heard of 32-bit float sound before, prepare to have your minds blown. It's basically a way where you almost don't need to set the levels. You can pretty much, as long as you can see signal coming in, you'll have the ability in post to bring that up as much as you want, bring it down as much as you want, and it's pretty hard for it to get clipped or distorted. Now, those aren't hard and fast rules. There'll probably be some audiophiles out there rolling their eyes right now. But for video nerds like myself, it's an absolute game changer. So if you haven't got into 32-bit float sound yet, or you haven't got a device that can record it, put that on your list of really, really soon things to acquire, because it's going to help you a great deal. And this Zoom F6, I've found to be super, super beneficial. It just takes a Sony NP battery on the back there, or you can power it off USB. So on my rig for my Red, I've got this crazy cable that I got made up that it powers this off the USB port of the Red. And then I've also got another setup, which is just the sexiest thing ever. That's a belt pack where I wear the F6 around my waist, so I can be running around cuddle. I'll often shoot cuddle cam. I've got you can see back there, I've got the Cine saddle, which I've recently become a fan of. So I can be cuddle camming like my C500, and I can have this down on my waist. I've got a couple of these beautiful little Sennheiser AVX. So I don't know if you've seen these before. These are the Sennheiser wireless mic systems. So this is the receiver. That's all it is, just that little guy for a receiver. And it means that you can plug that into a mixer. If I get this guy in here, and you can rotate the position of it. So if you need the antenna kind of sticking up more, and that's it. It's got its own internal battery. It takes a phantom power signal. It doesn't need it for the audio and it doesn't need it for the power. But if you use phantom power with it, it means every time you turn your recorder on, it automatically turns the receiver on. And when you turn the recorder off, it powers your receiver off, so you're not going to run out of battery without realizing. So these are really, it'd be great if it had a way of phantom power actually giving this thing juice, but that doesn't seem to be possible. But it's still pretty amazing. And that just pairs up with, you can have a reporter mic, like a standard handheld, or obviously you can have your lav transmitter that it pairs up with. So this has been a fantastic little kit. I've found a way of some little adapters that I got that can actually get this receiver out a little bit further so that they stick out the side of my sound bag, my little waist bag. And yeah, like I said, it's just an incredibly sexy little rig I've got going there. One other little thing I've been playing around with for these kind of run and gun shoots where, you know, you have to be mobile, you have to be quick. These little guys here are just Bluetooth audio receiver transmitters. So you can see how thin they are. I'll jump in there. You can see extremely small. And basically, there's still a tiny little bit of latency in them, and the quality, you know, there's a bit of compression to it. But if it's just for a confidence monitor where you want to make sure that what you're recording on your separate device is still working and it's not completely distorted, this is a great way to run, where you could basically, there's a little switch on the top that says TX/RX, so you can choose which one you want to be the transmitter, choose which one you want to be the receiver. You could pop one onto your camera. It's got its own internal battery. Pop that into the headphone jack, and then this could be on your body somewhere, set to a pair of earbuds, and you've got yourself a wireless monitoring device, so that if you do, in my situation where you've got a recorder around your waist and you've got a camera on your shoulder or a camera on your cine saddle, you don't have a cable that you're constantly tripping over. So these have been a super handy thing to get around. So let me just run through some quick questions here. I'll see if I can bring some of them up. Just 1 second. Just because that's a kind of a wanky thing to do. So if you didn't catch me say it before, this is the software called Mimo Live that I'm, sorry, let me be professional and switch to the lapel mic there. This is the software called Mimo Live that I'm using to do all this layering and the various kind of dynamic switching things. So let's just bring up this question from Steve. Should pop up here. So Steve says, how do you deal with logging of footage on set so you don't kill yourself trying to figure out what's what when you sit in front of the edit suite, especially with a crew of only 1 or 2? That's a really good question, Steve, and it's probably something that we can learn together, because I've never had the patience to do it. It really depends, from what I understand, it really depends on the camera system you're working with. I know with things like Atomos recorders, so I've got a Sumo I'm looking at here, I've got a couple of Shoguns as well. They've got ways of flagging clips as you go. There'll be, each a lot of cameras will have their own marking facility where as you record, you can flag a clip as, say, a go take, and then that should carry through in metadata to post. I would be reluctant to start trying some kind of a manual method for logging clips. I think that's for the bigger shoots where you've got script supervisors and continuity and people like that who can take care of that kind of a more manual process. There's guys who are way smarter than I am with products like QTake HD, and I know those have some pretty amazing metadata and logging functions built into them. A lot of the sound guys have some pretty cool tech that's starting to come out for their kit that brings a lot of that metadata through into the post workflow, so they can be flagging takes as they go. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer on that, because I'm kind of lazy and a little bit impatient with that stuff. So the thing that's really saved my bacon has been timecode, so that I'm not wasting any time syncing takes up. I can have really high quality dual system sound that I know is reliable. The other thing that dual system sound gives you is not so much with the F6, but with things like the F8 or other recorders, you can often get a safety track. So if you are in a rush situation where you're worried about the levels, you can have a second copy of that of a person's audio file being recorded at say -10. So if for some reason they scream and yell or something loud happens, you know you've got that backup track that you can cross to in your edit that has a safe lower audio level. I've got this little guy here I didn't mention before. Let me just clear that. Sorry I haven't got this stuff on my remote. I've got this little guy here. That's Electrosonics PDR. So that's you put a little lithium battery in there, you get about 6 to 8 hours of it, and that's a lav amplifier and recorder. So you put I've got a little Sanken COS 11D lav mic that I plug into that, and it's got a little a micro SD card in it, and you can jam timecode to it, so you can sync it up to all your cameras and all your other devices. But I could mic up talent with that, and they could go as far as they wanted away from me. So for instance, if you're doing some kind of a piece to camera on a drone or something crazy like that, where you just couldn't get close to the talent or close enough for your wireless transmitters to work, you can pop this guy on there, push roll at the start of the day, they can head away, and you can sync all of that sound up later in post. And it does the same thing. It does the safety track where you can have your main level set, and then you can have a -10 track being recorded at the same time, because obviously you can't change the levels on the fly. It means that you've got that kind of safety for when you get into post. So another little cool thing on the audio front. So look, I think I've blathered on for long enough, unless there's any other questions that people have got. Doesn't look like anything at the moment, but certainly reach out to me on social media. And if you want to have any topics really drilled into in future episodes, we can do that. I've got a lot of cool tech on the way, some things that I'm buying soon. For instance, some of that NDI and PTZ camera equipment that I think is going to start to become more of a norm. I think in this brave new world of isolated social distancing and quarantine, having these kind of remote head cameras. I mean, you can even control these cameras in a different state. You could have one of these PTZ cameras in Sydney and I could control it from here in Brisbane and be getting a CEO to do a piece to camera for me that I'm recording remotely. That kind of stuff's possible because you're working over networks, over IP. So that opens up a whole world of possibilities. So I think I didn't really have time to plan for any kind of a fancy ending. So I thought the best way to do it was to quickly tell you about how I'm getting out to the world. So we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Vimeo live concurrently at the moment. And to do that, I'm using Teradek's core cloud service. So all of the output of this guy here is running through, it's coming out of the Blackmagic A10 Mini. Actually, I'll just give you a quick look at my rack. Hang on, that came out wrong. Yeah, anyway. You don't want to see my rack. But this rack mount that I have all my equipment in, so just to give you a quick rundown on that. So down here I've got an older Blackmagic input-output device that I used to use for, let me my lapel so you can hear me properly, sorry. That was on one of my old edit suites. I've now repurposed that as an input device for My Live. So I've got Monstro and my laptop running into that. Next up here is the newer Ultra Studio 4K Mini, and that's taking the C500 4K feed into My Live. This is an Apollo, UAD Apollo, one of the older ones. I'm not using that today, but that's for bigger shows when I need more microphones. So it's got 4 preamps and it's got a heap of inputs and outputs so I can send people different IFB feeds. This is a headphone monitor, which is more for podcasting and possibly also for bigger broadcasts, so I can modify the levels and even mix different signals together for someone's in-ear feed. So if they want to hear more of themselves and less of somebody else, I can do that. This is a Television Studio HD switcher. My Live actually has the ability to change these inputs dynamically. So I can set up macros that change an input, which sort of opens up more input possibilities into the computer. And then up here, I've got this can be set to whatever I want, but at the moment I've got a little RGB parade for color and luminance. And then I've got some audio monitors there, and this is a phase analyzer. So it's just a single line at the moment because it's just me talking and a voice is a mono signal. But if I played a piece of music, that would you'd see that sort of start to expand out. So that's the sort of the hub of this control system. All of that's running out to a Video Go, which is this really cool device. I did have a picture of it, but I think that's disappeared. It's basically can take an Ethernet cable, Wi-Fi. It's got 2 nodes on the side that can each have a 4G SIM card in them. And you can also bond up to 4 phones to it. So you create this unbreakable bonded connection to the outside world for your live streaming. I used to be on ADSL 1 here until last week. The max we could download was 3.5 megabits per second. Thanks Malcolm. And thanks ScoMo. And last week we got connected to the national broadband network, which was a pretty momentous occasion. Unfortunately, we can only get a maximum of 50 megabits down, 20 megabits up, but it's enough to do this kind of thing. I've also got a giant mast on my roof that's connected to a couple of 4G SIM cards. And that's what we're broadcasting out on now, because I'm still not entirely trusting the government or the NBN to deliver in that regard. But I say all that to say something like the Video Go gives a schmuck like me the confidence to stream, because you've got so many different connections that are all bonded together so that if one fails over, you know something else is going to pick up the slack, and they can also aggregate their speeds together. So I thought the best way to end today would be for me to do another one of those wanky phone screen shares, which is something that a lot of people will find useful. So if I just go to that, and then I bring this guy in, what you'll actually be able to see, hopefully there's nothing dodgy on here, like my Angry Birds session, is my phone screen. So if we jump over to Core, Teradek's Core app, actually first why don't I show you the video go. So if we jump in there, you should be able to see. So you can see there, 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 so you can see there. Let's get rid of that real quick. I didn't think that was going to happen. All right, just let me mute that audio. Where are we? You guys don't need to hear that. There we go, taken care of. So now let me jump to Core and we can end the stream together. Isn't that beautiful? So this is the Core app. So you can see here down with my destinations, I've got the 3 places that I'm streaming out to. If I was on the website, the web version of this, you'd be able to see some pretty cool analytics where it actually shows you the history, a graph of each of your connections and how they've been performing over the period of it. Encoded details, let's see if that shows it. There you go. So there you can see down the bottom there, the 3 connections that are running and the kinds of delay that are being introduced on them. So obviously the modem 1 is that little 4G SIM card, which it's in my server rack at the moment, which gets almost no mobile coverage. So that's not surprising that there'd be a big bunch of delay there. But the other 2 are doing quite well. So that's a pretty cool thing to kind of have a bit of a confidence on, at a glance you can see how your stream's going and know that your network's holding up, and it'll show. When I recently did a telethon, a listening party for Violent Soho from here, and there was a couple of times in that graph where it just dropped to 0 before we started rolling, and my sphincter stayed pretty much clenched for the entire show, and thankfully those dropouts didn't happen again. But when you see those on a graph, it can really catch your breath. So that's Core. I've blabbed on for long enough. I hope some of this has been of use to people. It's something I'd love to do more often. So please get in touch through the comments if there's other things that you want me to focus on in future episodes. This is just going to get nerdier and nerdier, and it's always going to be live, which will be a bit of a seat of your pants production style of thing. And I'm sure I'll make some mistakes and do things that I shouldn't do, but that's all the fun of it. So yeah, if you've enjoyed it, hit me up, let me know. Please, if you can, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/GraetzMedia. You can like the Graetz Media Facebook page, follow us on Vimeo with a pretty great community there. And so now I'm going to push the magic button and say goodbye. That's the theory anyway. So see you later, everybody. Here we go. Stop.